DW documentary presents opioid crisis in the U.S., a sweeping 51-minute investigation into how corporate greed, regulatory failure, and cartel opportunism combined to create the worst drug epidemic in American history. This documentary features jaw-dropping first-hand testimony from pharmaceutical executives turned whistleblowers, pill mill operators, cartel members, and the families destroyed by fentanyl. It is a damning indictment of an entire system. Section 1, Insys Therapeutics and the Fentanyl Gold Rush. The documentary opens with the story of Insys Therapeutics, a company that produced a sublingual fentanyl spray called Subsys. Fentanyl is roughly 50 times more potent than heroin, and Subsys was approved exclusively for breakthrough cancer pain in end-of-life patients. The company's owner, John Kapoor, was deeply unhappy with the drug's sluggish market performance and desperate to take the company public. He hired an aggressive executive named Alec Burlikov to supercharge sales. Insys went public in 2013, and within a year the stock was valued at over $1 billion. Sales numbers were tracked daily and broadcast each morning to incentivize the team. As one former employee puts it, addicts definitely made us a lot of extra money, and that is true. The gold rush mentality was fueled by watching Purdue Pharma rake in $2 billion a year selling opioids. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. Section 2, Bribes, Dancers, and the Titration King. The sales tactics at Insys were breathtaking in their brazenness. The company ran so-called speaker programs where doctors were paid to talk about the benefits of Subsys. In reality, 9 times out of 10, no presentation was ever given. Doctors simply showed up, collected their money at a dinner, and left. Alec Burlikov recruited former exotic dancers as sales representatives, sending them to flirt with doctors and convince them to write prescriptions based on personal relationships rather than medical need. One Florida sales rep became known as the Titration King, a reference to the practice of gradually increasing a patient's dose of fentanyl. Insys offered bigger bonuses for higher doses, creating a perverse incentive structure where more drugs meant more money. The company even produced an internal rap video set to an A$AP Rocky beat, with employees dressed as rappers singing about titration. When prosecutors first saw the video, they could not believe what they were watching. Section 3, the Sham call center and Sarah Fuller to get insurance companies to pay for prescriptions that should never have been written. Insys set up its own reimbursement center. This was a call center where operators would pretend to be calling from doctors' offices, lying to insurance companies about patients' conditions. One key operator, Patty Nixon, describes how she would claim to be calling from a doctor's office in Michigan while sitting in a building in Phoenix, Arizona. The critical fraud was in the phrasing. When asked whether the prescription was for breakthrough cancer pain, operators were trained to respond, "Yes, it's for the breakthrough pain," deliberately giving the impression it was cancer-related without technically saying so. This deception had fatal consequences for Sarah Fuller, a young woman from Florida who had been addicted to OxyContin but had gotten clean. Her family doctor introduced her to a sales representative who demonstrated the fentanyl spray in the examination room, which is entirely illegal. Sarah was never told it was an opioid or that it could be addictive or lethal. The cost was over $24,000 per month. Within weeks, Insys had titrated her dose from 200 to 600 without her knowledge or consent. 2 weeks before she died, Sarah told her mother she felt like she was dying. The coroner determined she was dead before she hit the ground. Personal injury attorney Richard Hollowell tracked down the recorded phone call between an Insys operator and the insurance company, obtaining the smoking gun evidence of the fraud. Section 4, Florida's pill mills and the George brothers. The documentary shifts to Florida, where lax regulation turned the state into the epicenter of the pill mill epidemic. At one point, Palm Beach County had more pain clinics than McDonald's restaurants. Chris George and his twin brother Jeff ran the largest pain clinic operation in the country despite having 0 medical credentials. They were buying oxycodone and fentanyl from drug wholesalers, which was technically legal, and hiring doctors whose only role was to rubber stamp prescriptions. The average patient examination lasted 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Doctors carried guns under their lab coats. An MRI machine was placed behind a strip club because both operated 24 hours. Everything was cash. At their peak, the Georges were pulling in $2 million a month in profit. Chris George describes his favorite vehicle, a $250,000 Freightliner pickup truck converted from a semi, with 0 apparent remorse. When asked about patients who died from overdoses, he shrugs and says freedom has a cost. The surveillance operation that eventually brought the Georges down took years of careful work, including undercover agents entering the clinics and exhaustive review of security footage. Law enforcement wanted to make sure that once they moved, the entire operation would collapse permanently. Section 5, Mexican cartels enter the game. The documentary's most chilling section follows the fentanyl supply chain across the border into Mexico. As American authorities cracked down on pill mills and pharmaceutical companies, street supply dried up. The cartels saw their opportunity. One former cartel chemist had spent 15 years in a U.S. federal prison where he learned to manufacture fentanyl. Upon release and deportation to Mexico, he explained to the cartels that synthetic fentanyl was the most profitable drug they had ever seen or would ever see. No poppy fields needed, just chemicals. The the cartels began counterfeiting pills to look identical to legitimate pharmaceuticals, using pill presses that could be purchased online for $5,000. A young cartel recruit named Louis describes being lured into the trade at age 15 by a cousin who promised to turn his 1,500 peso weekly earnings into dollars. He lay awake all night looking at the moon before deciding to take the leap. The documentary captures a moment of genuine tension when military vehicles approach during filming. Today, millions of counterfeit pills containing deadly amounts of fentanyl flood the American black market, sold through the internet and social media. Section 6, Justice Delayed and the Sackler Question. The documentary chronicles the raids and prosecutions that eventually came. 150 law enforcement officers descended on Insys properties. Chris George served 11 years for racketeering. Alek Berlikov received just 2 years. Insys founder John Kapoor was sentenced to 5.5 years but served only 2. Meanwhile, the Sackler family, whose aggressive marketing of OxyContin at Purdue Pharma is widely credited with triggering the entire epidemic, reached another settlement in June 2025, once again avoiding a trial. Congressional testimony is shown in which a Sackler family member is asked whether the estimated $12 billion in family profits should be returned to victims. The response is a stammering "I really don't know the answer to that." The documentary draws a devastating parallel between El Chapo, sentenced to life in prison, and the Sackler family, who have faced no criminal consequences despite their products killing hundreds of thousands. As one prosecutor puts it, "We have never been able to say no in America to companies and people who want to make money." Section 7, The Deeper Addiction Economy. The documentary closes with a broader philosophical point about capitalism and addiction. An expert draws a direct line from opioids to sugar, coffee, gambling, video games, smartphones, and social media. All exploit the same brain chemistry. Sugar hits the same receptors as heroin. Corporations understand human brain chemistry better than drug dealers, and they weaponize that understanding for profit. The opioid crisis is not an aberration but an extreme expression of an economic system that rewards the creation of dependency. It is, as the documentary suggests, a scary thing what we have allowed to have happen to our economy. Key takeaways: this is one of the most comprehensive and emotionally devastating documentaries on the opioid crisis produced in recent years. The first-hand testimony from people on every side of the supply chain, from pharmaceutical executives to cartel members to grieving families, creates a panoramic view of a catastrophe that has killed over 1 million Americans. The lack of proportionate consequences for the Sackler family remains the scandal within the scandal. The pivot from legal pill mills to illegal cartel supply demonstrates how prohibition without addressing demand simply reshapes the market without reducing the body count. Essential viewing for anyone trying to understand how America arrived at this point.